morning stroll. Today's a little different. Obviously, it's community and running. There's mental benefits to running. Today, I'll be running with Luke Bronin, who's currently campaigning for. What are you campaigning for?
I'm running for Congress. I'm running for Congress in the greater Hartford area. It's Connecticut's 1st district.
Now, for people that don't understand what running for Congress actually means, like, what is that?
So basically, I'm running to represent this area in Washington. There's 5 congressional seats in Connecticut. One of them is this greater Hartford area. It's basically 27 towns around Hartford. It's a weird looking district. It goes from Torrington to Granby down to Middletown out to Southington. But includes Hartford, East Hartford, Manchester, West Hartford, lots of towns around here. And I'm running against the guy who's been there since 1998. So I'm running against John Larson. And I respect him. I just think we've got to start getting some new voices down there because what we're doing isn't working.
How do you balance your mental health and running for a campaign, your seat?
I don't know that I always do it all that well. I try. I used to run a lot. And for me, that was actually a really important thing. I kind of messed up my knee, so I don't do it as often now. But I try to exercise a good amount. And I also started doing meditation a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And, I tried it at different times through my life, but for the last couple of years, I've done it a lot more consistently. And that's actually really been an important thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if I don't exercise in some way, and if I don't set aside a little bit of time to just get that mental space and do some meditation, then I feel it, right?
Right.
I'm not saying I do it every day, but when I don't, I really feel it.
So another question we have is, what specific economic developments would you prioritize? And what would be the metric that we hold you to know if it's working within the first couple of years?
Yeah, there's 2 big things. I mean, the first is housing. So when I was mayor, we focused a lot.
You was mayor?
When I was mayor, we focused a lot on trying to get housing built. We got thousands of units built, fixed up a lot of units that were falling apart. Things like the Westbrook Village, Bowles Park redevelopment, but also the developments around the ballpark. And I think we've got a housing crisis in this state and in this area. The rents keep going further and further up. We haven't built enough housing. It's harder and harder to find, decent places to live that are affordable. And as a mayor, you're close to the ground trying to get those projects to happen. As a member of Congress, you don't have the same sort of on the ground impact. But what you can do is try to build a partnership. A lot of those projects are hard to make work. And it matters when there's a federal government that actually wants to create housing. And when people say, oh, that's not what the federal government should be doing, that's BS. You look back to the time, decades ago, the federal government basically created the housing market in this country. They created middle-class housing. And we've got to get back in the business of really trying to build housing so that there's actually good quality, affordable housing in communities like ours. The other thing is support for small businesses. So, when I was mayor and we went through the pandemic, it just crushed so many small businesses. So we put a lot into trying to reactivate storefronts, trying to get retail set up. And we put this grant program together called the Heart Lift, which was about trying to help small business owners who were trying to open up in vacant storefronts in neighborhoods. And there were dozens and dozens of small businesses that opened because of that. So those are 2 areas where on economic development, I want to see the federal government be a much better partner. And not just during a pandemic, but all the time. And so that's stuff I really want to work on.
So your seat there would allow you to do what? How would you, having a seat of Congress, change how the federal government handles us?
So one of the things you can do in Congress is you can use your voice. You can use that platform to say, we need a federal government that's helping to build more housing. We need a federal government that's helping to support small businesses, especially in communities that have been left behind.
Right.
And so it's just using that voice and keeping those issues front and center.
Okay.
But then it's also about saying, we're going to fight for the money to bring back to invest in those things.
Word.
Because it makes all the difference when you've got a federal government working hand in hand with local government to try to get stuff done.
Word. So when it comes to the youth and violence prevention, what's your plan to access jobs, mentorship, career opportunities, and how would your approach be different than the programs that already exist? So instead of saying, hey, well, we're just going to put some more money into this or put some more money into that. And so how would your approach be different?
I mean, one thing I think is you look at what's already working and then you figure out how do we do it bigger and better. And one of those examples I think is the Hartford Youth Service Corps. So that's something we created together with OPP, our piece of the pie, and we built it because we kept hearing from folks who were in the community doing violence prevention work, but just working with young people in general, saying there's just no job opportunities for young people who aren't already on that path. We got so many young people who, maybe they didn't finish high school, maybe they finished high school and aren't, going on to more school or haven't found a job yet, and we don't have a path for them. So we created this thing called the Youth Service Corps, which basically, gives year-round employment, gives a paycheck, gives folks a chance to do things in the community that actually make a difference. Everything from shoveling snow for seniors in the winter to, fixing up community gardens, and get connected to, a set of coaches and mentors and supports to make that plan for what comes next. And at this point, a few thousand young people in Hartford have been part of that Youth Service Corps and have gone through it. And I've talked to so many of them, and I think it's really made a difference. So something like that, I want to grow it. I mean, I hear you about saying, what new can we do? But sometimes it's about saying, what are we doing that's working? And then how do we do it better? And how do we do it in a way that actually gives a chance to all the young people? There's a lot of other important stuff when it comes to violence prevention. I think the work that Compass Peace Builders does out there is really important. There's a bunch of groups, Hartford Communities of Care, what used to be the Blue Hill Civic Association.
Yeah.
And some of that stuff's fallen away.
Yeah.
I really think that we have to go much bigger from the federal side in investing in those violence prevention efforts. And those things should be linked up together. Right? If there's a young person who Compass Peace Builders is working with, and that young person needs a job, then sync up with the Youth Service Corps. Make sure that you get that path. I think one of the reasons it would be good to have more mayors in Congress is that when you're a mayor, you're kind of on the ground doing this work with the organizations in the community. You know what's real, what's not. You have a better sense of what's working and what's not. And so you can partner better.
For programs such as Compass or anything similar, HCTC, OPP, what is one thing that you think you would be able to hang your hat on that would enhance or improve the work that they do?
The biggest thing is having someone that's advocating for those programs. That's shining a light on how much real good work they're doing, and why getting them the resources matter. And it doesn't just mean getting money from Washington. It could mean helping to raise money from private sources. It could mean helping to push the state to put more investments into those things. But having a voice that has a platform advocating for organizations like Compass or like Our Piece of the Pie to grow that work can really make a difference. The other piece that I think is kind of a missing piece of the puzzle in Hartford, and I feel like we didn't do a good enough job on this by far, is just the recreation opportunities. Just more opportunities to be part of a sports league. More opportunities to get out there and just have some fun.
We halfway through the run, stretching it out a little bit. We really run it too. You see the sweat equity.
My sweat comes faster than yours.
You mentioned it's the hair. I don't got hair, so mine's take a while. But
I appreciate you saying that. I got less and less.
You mentioned being able to improve how you handle like the Parks and Rec situation and things like that. What did you mean by it?
I think there's just a huge gap in terms of the sports opportunities, the recreational opportunities for kids in a city like Hartford and kids in a lot of suburbs. And a lot of that comes down to money going into the school system. There's just been, more and more cuts to things like middle school sports. And there's reasons for it, but there are reasons that we need to fix. Right. And even at the federal side, I just don't think the federal government has been doing anything when it comes to education. And think about education broadly, about what it means to support special ed, what it means to support English language learners, and what it means to make sure that schools can actually have sports leagues, and that you don't have to pay to be able to participate, on a football team or a soccer team or a basketball team. I think all this stuff is stuff that you do better when you have everybody pushing in the same direction. But I mean, we set up some night gyms when I was there. We didn't have anybody show up. I know the city's making a new push on that, which I think is really, really good. But the other piece is you got to think about what comes along with it. Sometimes you need transportation. Sometimes if you're saying you got a gym open, but then kids have to walk home at 10 o'clock
and it's dangerous.
That's maybe more dangerous than if you didn't have that. So you got to think about all pieces of that. And that's where having everybody, kind of federal, state, local, all working together is the best way to do it right.
So right now, we got a crazy rise in developments, new housing projects and things like that. How would you ensure that the current Hartford North End residents don't get priced out, making sure that the residents that are currently here don't get priced out with the new developments that are coming in?
Okay. I think first of all, you got to make sure that where you have affordable housing that already exists, it's got to be good quality, and that means you got to crack down on the slumlords who are, you know, letting places fall apart. And the federal government turns a blind eye to that all the time, and we tried really hard to crack down on that stuff. And we need a federal government that is holding slumlords accountable in a much bigger way. And then in terms of new housing, look, I think we just have to build so much more. You know, we just haven't built enough housing for years and years and years. And that's why the rents are going through the roof. So I want to see us focus on building housing of every kind, like affordable, low income, but also market rate. I also want Hartford to be a place where, you know, if you grow up here and you do well, you don't have to move out to some other town, you know, to find a place that you want to be. I want this to be a place where, you know, we can build a community that that people are coming into, that people who grow up here want to stay in. So I look at, you know, things like, I don't know if you have seen it, but, you know, the Arrowhead Cafe, you know, and the Flatiron building that was next to it.
Right.
You know, those buildings sat there vacant for decades, and we worked hard to bring them back to life. Now they're apartments, and it didn't push anybody out. It brought vacant buildings back to life. And we got so many vacant lots, we got so much surface parking, there's so much room to build new housing and make sure we have some of that set aside affordable, set aside low income, but also market rate, because we got to make sure that wherever you are, you can find a place that's, you know, accessible, affordable, and a lot of that comes down to building more housing. If you think about what developments like the Arrowhead and that block where Salvin Shoes was, like what that does to connect neighborhoods again. One of the reasons that you saw so much deterioration in parts of the North End was that it was isolated. It's cut off from downtown by this sea of surface parking lots. You do things like the housing development around the ballpark, like the Arrowhead Cafe, and then you can start to bring investment up Albany Avenue, up North Main Street. And it's about making sure that, you know, we're bringing blighted buildings back to life, creating housing or businesses in those vacant lots. That's the stuff that makes a community healthier.
Ask people in the neighborhood, hey, what's some things you would ask someone that's running for Congress? Or the person who is already in the seat. And the answer was, why should we believe that you guys are going to fix certain things here when they've been hearing that for so long? And I think they just have kind of given up. I think it's because of the lack of faith and trust. When you say bring businesses and things like that, or just do work on the affordable housing and uplift the North and Main Street, Albany area, what does that look like for you? Well, in a way that we can understand it.
I think, you know, for me, since I was mayor for 8 years, I can point to specific stuff. You know, it's mentioned earlier, it's after decades of not getting anything done, the redevelopment of Bowles Park and Westbrook Village. You know, you look at Woodland and Albany, which sat vacant for decades, and you got that construction going up right now, which is going to create a place for new businesses, and also, you know, for the city health department. That's a real commitment of a lot of resources that we made into a block that for decades it sat vacant, and the neighborhood was begging for something to be done there. You know, you look at a place like Samia. I don't know if you go there. I love that coffee shop. That survives in part because it's now connected to the other development that we did around the ballpark and pushing that development north. So when you create the conditions, when you connect neighborhoods back together, when you get things built, it then sparks other stuff. You know, momentum creates momentum. And so I think there's a lot of examples where we really push hard to get new things built, to get blighted property fixed up, and then it helps a small business come in and survive. But again, you know, I don't, right now, under Donald Trump, the federal government just isn't focused on that stuff, doesn't care about that stuff. And I'm not pretending that, you know, you let me to Congress and I can fix all that stuff. What I can do, though, is fight for it. I can advocate for it, and I can be a partner, you know, with the cities and towns around here to try to get that stuff done.
With all the violence and poverty and grief and things that people experience, both young and old, in the Hartford area, so many overlooked mental health issues and crises, how would you back that and support that? What push do you want to put behind the mental health?
You know, like you, I've been to a lot of living rooms, you know, of parents and grandparents who lost kids. Been to a lot of funerals where friends are grieving friends. And I've talked with a lot of folks who are doing the work of trying to, you know, help young people or or stop violence, and the burnout that they're feeling is real. And so I think there's a couple things. One, you got to make sure there's enough people doing that work that it's not just falling on a few shoulders. A handful of people can't do all that, and that comes down to growing. We were talking about Compass Peace Builders earlier. We should help that team grow, so it's not just a few people bearing that burden. Mental health more general, there's everything from like the really serious mental health issues. You show up at Hartford Hospital now, you got beds in hallways, you got waiting lists where nobody can get care. So you got a healthcare system that is broken, from the bottom up, and then on the other side of the spectrum, like we were talking about earlier, sometimes the best answer to the stress and the burnout and trauma is just the chance to get away and do something else. And that's where it comes back to sports. That's where it comes back to, other kind of opportunities to just get into a different place physically or mentally.
In the Navy, how did that impact just any sort of trauma that you experienced during that time? How did that impact how you try to show up for people?
So I was a Navy intelligence officer. I was a reservist except for my deployment. I deployed to Afghanistan in part of 2010, part of 2011. I was over there on an anti-corruption task force. I was not in combat.
Okay.
But I have a huge amount of respect for everybody who has carried that stuff on their shoulders. And I think when you think about the kind of violence that a lot of young people have experienced here in Hartford, it's the similar kind of trauma, if not more intense in some cases. And so recognizing that as a country, thank God we've gotten a lot better at treating PTSD, at recognizing sort of the unseen wounds of war. We have not yet gotten good at treating that kind of trauma in communities.
Right.
And that's something that I think we need to really shine a light on, because I'm grateful for the service of a veteran who wore the uniform and went to combat and saw things that they should never have to see.
Right.
It's also true that there are kids growing up 2 blocks from here. Right. We're seeing things they should never have to see.
Right.
And we need to treat both of those things with seriousness as a country.
This is true. So obviously, when people mention Hartford, they think of a certain type of people, people in the core of Hartford. Like right where we are, the Barber Street, the Main Street, the Frog Hollow, the Clay Arsenal area. How would you ensure that they have a voice? Can you think of a time when you were mayor or running for mayor to keep your seat or to get the seat? Can you think of a time that a person in the community shifted your thought process or how you wanted to do something? Regardless of how long someone takes a seat in office or tries to move into Hartford or whatever, it'll never be the same as being from here.
Yeah.
And really growing up with the highs and the lows of it, right?
Right.
If you think of a time that a Hartford resident was so adamant on something that it shifted your thought process on something and how you went about something.
Yeah, I mean, first let me just say, hopefully anybody who saw me as mayor knows I was out there all the time. I try to be out there in every neighborhood all the time, not just during election times. I mean, I would just go and knock on doors even when there wasn't an election.
So you wasn't just cookout Luke?
Right. Although I love crashing cookouts. I do a lot of crashing cookouts. But I mean, I think it's really important to put yourself out there to hear the things that you need to hear, because so many times, you do a town hall, something like that, it's the same 10 people who show up. Yeah. And it's the same 10 issues that they want to talk about. If you want to hear what people are feeling in the community, you got to go out there, and not with some big entourage. Just get out there and walk and talk to people. We talked a little bit about the Youth Service Corps. I think that's something that the reason we made that one of our top priorities coming in, one of the first things that we tried to get done, was because I heard that from folks who were doing work on the ground in the community, trying to help kids get on, a different path. And the biggest gap was there's no job opportunity.
Right.
And where there is a job opportunity, if a kid isn't yet ready for that job and doesn't have the other supports around, then you might just be setting them up for failure.
Right.
And so making sure you build something that actually lets a kid get a paycheck, but also comes with the team around them that's helping them build that into something bigger down the road.
Right.
So that's something I heard a lot. How you doing? The other piece is so often I hear people frustrated about housing conditions.
Yeah.
And I think that's an issue where I don't think we focused enough on it earlier. Yeah. And it was people like Terry Morrison in the community who really, shined a light on the conditions in some of the buildings. Look at Barber Gardens, for example. Yeah. It was really bad. Yeah. And And once we heard, when I went into those buildings, and you see the mold, you see the mouse droppings, you see the conditions that babies are in the cradle getting asthma, it changes the way you think about that stuff.
Right.
And so I'm really grateful to folks like Terry and so many others who ran that No More Slumlords campaign.
Right.
Because I think the truth is we were not focused on it enough early on, and we focused on it a lot more because of the work that they did to raise that attention. And I think that's an example of how people can affect things in their community. I mean, yes, we want people to vote. I hope everybody votes. It really, really matters. But also, it actually does matter if you raise your voice and organize, people to raise their voice and saying this is something that's broken, that needs to be fixed, and not let people in elected office, like I was, look away from it.
Right.
To me, folks like Terry Morrison and the other families who made that push to say don't ignore this problem. They're heroes in the community, and they're examples of what it looks like to advocate for community. And the flip side is, though, that only works if you got folks in elected office who actually want to listen and want to hear and are willing to say, yeah, we can do things better.
What does it mean to be running for Congress? For people that don't understand that.
I just think things are out of control right now. You got a president that's out of control. Everything they're doing is driving costs through the roof. This crazy, this crazy war in Iran drives up the price of gas. The tariffs drive up the price of groceries. When they are raiding construction sites and and car washes, and sort of terrorizing communities with ICE, you're driving up the costs of things too. Just everything they're doing is making life harder for people. And you've got a Congress that I think is basically letting Trump do whatever he wants. And I want to see a Congress that stands up and says no to Donald Trump. But beyond that, when you talk about issues like healthcare, housing, childcare, cost of electricity, this is all stuff that the federal government can help with if it wants to. And right now, it doesn't want to. And I want to see people down there who are standing up loud and clear, fighting to make life easier and healthier and more affordable for communities. And like I said before, I think that it matters to have folks who've been a mayor down there, who can sort of bring a different kind of perspective to it. And I'm running against John Larson. He's been a member of Congress since 1998. He's turning 80 years old in the next term. If he got elected, he'd be turning 80 years old down there. And I respect his service, but I just think that at a certain time, you've got to get some new energy down there. You've got to get some new voices and some new perspective down there. And I think it matters because people are losing faith that our politics has the ability to make any changes. And so I think we got to get some folks in there who are bringing some new energy to the fight and have a different kind of expectation for what we can do in this country and what we can do in communities like this. The main election for this congressional seat is the Democratic primary, which happens August 11th. So if you're a Democrat, you can vote on August 11th. You can vote early. You can go down to City Hall any day in the week before August 11th. You can do an absentee ballot. It's a lot easier to vote now than it used to be here in Connecticut. But if you're a Democrat, then I hope you get out and use your voice. And even if you're not going to vote for me, that's fine. But get out there and vote. You were talking earlier about the fact that fewer and fewer people are voting in Hartford. And people should not think that, you were talking earlier about how fewer and fewer people are voting in Hartford. That really hurts Hartford. When you're talking about the state, what happens at the state capitol and what resources come back to a community like this. You're talking about, where folks in Washington focus. If communities like Hartford don't vote, people stop paying attention. To me, this is my home. I love this city. I will always fight for this city. But to have sort of the weight that Hartford ought to have, people got to show that weight by voting. People got to show we matter. You got to listen. And so I hope people get out and vote. Again, even if you don't vote for me, make sure that people don't see those voting numbers go down and down and down, because then people give up on a place like Hartford, and that hurts the community in real ways.
So the election, the first time that they're able to vote is?
So the primary is August 11th, but there's early voting. So any day of the week before August 11th, you can go into City Hall and you can cast your vote. But the other thing is, a lot of folks are not registered with either party. And I get that, because people are pissed off, they're frustrated, it doesn't feel like the system's working. But you can only vote in this primary if you're a Democrat. So if you're not a part of a party, if you're unaffiliated, you can switch to Democrat anytime between now and August 11th, and then you can participate, you can vote, and and have your voice heard. So, if folks want to be part of that, then make sure you're registered Democrat. If you've got friends who are unaffiliated, make sure they know about that too. And again, I'm not saying come and vote for me. I'm saying come out and vote, because it really, really does matter to how seriously other people take a community like Hartford.
All right, so obviously we just finished up a little bit more than we wanted to. We got about like 3 and some change, and so like a smooth 5K. For me personally, running is my thing. Is where I find my stride. Is where I'm able to get things out of my mind. I'm able to organize things. And I used to always say like, hey, I don't care for things like this, but also I'm learning the importance of being able to provide a person a space to just present what it is that they're offering, right? On the flip side, I understand how important the mental health component is. You talked about some of the stuff you do for your mental health, as far as like the exercise and stuff, right? What is something that you would want to add to your personal life to help with your mental health outside of physical fitness?
Outside of physical fitness, so the first thing is I got to get my knee fixed up so I can do this more often.
Yeah.
But to me, there's 2 things. I mean, to me, the best way to clear my head and the best way to get revitalized is hanging out with my kids. I got 3 kids, 17, 15, and 12. So they're at the ages where they don't want to hang out as much, but when I can hang out with them, like there's nothing better than that. I love to read, and I don't read as much as I used to. I don't read as much as I want to. So I listen to audiobooks more now, but I really, to me, there's nothing like sitting down and actually just getting lost in a book for a little while. So I'm gonna do more of that. And it's physical, but I love to hike.
Right.
And so when I have the time, I love to get out and just hit some trails for a while, and that, just being out there in the woods, and getting that physical space changes the way I think about things.
All right, so last thing before we go, if there's anything you want people to know as far as, one, let them know where to find you on the socials or your website, or however you guys do those things.
So you can find me on all the socials. It's at Luke Bronin. But also you can just find me out there. I mean, I'm not hard to find. We got our campaign headquarters right across from Parkville Market, but I try to be out there all the time. So this summer there's gonna be all kinds of stuff. We got all the usual festivals, Jazz Fest, stuff down here at the riverfront. I'm gonna try to be out there all the time. Come up and say hi. If you got questions, ask. If you got questions from this, just let us know on socials, and we'll get back to you, and or I'll give you a call. But it's important to me to be out there for people to be able to sort of push me on stuff they want to push me on, and for me to hear things that I got to hear. So I'm gonna try to be out there all the time.
Yeah, I try to make this as realistic as possible in the sense of what a session might look like. So some people do their sessions in the office, which I do as a therapist, as a clinician, but also I like to get out with people, get some bilateral movement going, ask some things that they're not expecting to be asked. So when everybody sees this, these aren't questions that he knew ahead of time, anything like that. But it was very important to get some bilateral movement and ask the questions in real time. I think the main thing that stood out to me, which is something that I am looking forward to, not just hearing from you, but other people that's running as well, is the push to with the development coming down this way, an area that's very overlooked, and also too the push behind the mental health and the clinicians, and getting more money put into those categories, and maybe adding like a social worker to like the rec centers and things like that. That's some things that I'm looking forward to. So,
and also for folks who are doing that work, whether it's social work, whether it's actual other kinds of clinical work, making sure that they're actually getting paid enough that they can keep doing it.
Right.
I mean, there's all kinds of burnout that folks who are doing that work feel. Some of it's just the emotional burden of doing that work, but some of it's that they're doing that work trying to help other people, and they're not getting paid enough to get their head above water in their own life. And so, the resources for that work really make a difference to how well we can do that work as a community.
So thanks, man. It's Therapy Running, STR. We're here bright and early with the birds, and the birds is chirping. Last time, at Luke Bronin on social.
I think they're all at Luke Bronin.
And August 11th.
August 11th.
August 11th. See you, STR Running. Checking out.